All right, I've just got a couple more questions now. So, the first one is, can you just tell me a bit about performance? Um, I mean, I've worked in the industry for a long time, so I know that sustainable investments don't necessarily offer lower returns, and often the returns are higher. Um, but I think there's always that little bit of nervousness when you're about to choose the ethical fund, because, we do have financial goals that we're trying to meet as well. So, can you reassure people around performance and what does it look like actually for your default fund compared to your ethical fund?
Um, yes, I mean it's a sad thing, isn't it, that that myth has is kind of perpetuated, and I think that it kind of stems from a time when ethical funds were designed in like a really narrowly defined way. They were really about cutting out absolutely everything, and so therefore you ended up with a very small number of things that you could invest in, and that's quite high risk, and the returns are uncertain. But that's not the way things are done anymore. And also responsible investment, which is kind of takes a broader perspective and isn't necessarily about ethical concerns, can do what I think a lot of people expect from a pension scheme. You expect people to be investing responsibly. So, and the reason why we do that is to get better returns. And all of the evidence shows that if you do that well, you are actually going to come out with better returns in the long run. So I think that there's been a lot of research done now on that, and it's really kind of time to dispel that myth, really. I mean, in terms of our default fund and our ethical fund, it's quite interesting because over the last, like our returns over the last 5 years, the ethical fund is actually outperforming our default fund. And so, that's quite interesting case study again of like you're not giving up returns if you're doing something that's in that space. I think that the thing to be aware of is that I just said that if you're old school ethical funds were kind of very narrowly defined and only invested in a few things. Well, that's not the case with our fund, but it is obviously a slightly narrower list, and it's slightly more focused on companies as opposed to other things. So it's less diversified, which does make it slightly higher risk, which therefore produces better returns. But I think that or has produced better returns in the recent markets that we've been having. Whereas our default fund, one of our ambitions for that fund is to make sure that we are managing risk really carefully, and not exposing people to risk that's unnecessary. So we're growing their fund whilst kind of keeping it as safe as we can as well. So that might explain some of that differentiation, but I think it really just goes to show that you can invest ethically and you can invest responsibly and you can do really well. Our funds have had over 9% return a year for the last 5 years, and that's a really, really strong performance. So we're really pleased with it, and we think that our approach is going to kind of stand the test of time as well, we hope.
I'm sure it will. It sounds like, you're doing a really great job. Um, okay, so last questions now. Um, you're, I mean, when it comes to kind of responsible investment, ethical investment, ESG, you're up there and doing it really well, but not all pension providers are. How do savers spot greenwash? How do they overcome it? And what can they do if they find that their provider isn't as sustainable as they'd like? Is Can they switch, or is there something else that they should be doing?
Um, so I think that the first thing to do is to look carefully at the information that your provider is setting out. Are they telling you anything about how they're investing your money? Are they actually even talking about this? Because some pension schemes still aren't. So I think that that's an indication that maybe they're not thinking about it yet. If they're not actually kind of talking about it, and if they're telling you about it, then that's a kind of a first step. And then you can look at things like top holdings. you can look at things like their quarterly investment reports. In our quarterly investment report, we always mention the activities that we've been doing from a responsible investment perspective. So, are they including any information about the activities that they've actually been doing to make their investments responsible within their fund fact sheets and within their kind of fund information? And that's another indication. But I think that if you kind of look into this and ask questions of your provider as well, you can write to them and you can ask them, what is your policy on this, and what are you doing? And most pension schemes should be able to tell you. If they're not, and if you're not feeling satisfied with the answers that you're getting, then it depends on what kind of a pension you've got. So if it's a workplace pension and you are in the pensions scheme that your employer has set up for you, then before you switch and before you transfer your funds out of that pension, you've got to think really carefully, because your employer might not contribute to the new pension in the destination where you decide to put it. So actually have a conversation with your employer first, say that you've had some concerns about where the money is going. And if they're receptive to that, then brilliant, because you might be able to change the company's pension policy. If they're not receptive to that, then I would say don't stop. Talk to your colleagues, talk to other people, try and get people to understand how important it is for for that to be done well and for it to be done in line with your kind of values. And I think that by doing that, we can all have a much bigger impact than we realise, because if we shift our pension pot, that's going to have, again, it's kind of like the analogy of the pension fund versus the fund management industry. If it's your pension pot versus your whole company's pensions pots, then the impact could be, kind of multiples of that. And if you believe in it, then I think really kind of go for it and encourage your company to choose a better provider, and one that seems to be doing more in this space and taking these things seriously. If it's a personal pension, it's a bit easier than that. You can kind of do the research and work out a pension provider that is walking the walk, and then you can ask to switch your funds, and that's a fairly straightforward process these days. So but I think that the company pension is really where you can make some difference if you talk to your employer and ask them what they're doing. Ask difficult questions of people. Ask difficult questions of your pension provider, and ask difficult questions of your employer, and see where you get.
Yeah, amazing. All right, Annie, let's we'll finish up there. But I just really, really appreciate you joining me today and just giving me some insight into how you do things at Nest. And you're up there doing some really great things and trying to make pensions more sustainable and more ethical and less risky and more long-term looking than most. So keep it up, and thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the recognition and for inviting me along. It's been really good.
Oh, good.